Welcome back to Grade 8 History, Unit Number 2, Canada's Changing Society, 1890 to 1914. This is Lesson Number 14. How is industrialization changing the workplace? Before we begin today's lesson, let's consider the following. What do you think were some intended and unintended causes of the rise of factories in the cities during the late 1800s? I want you to put the video on pause when I finish speaking so that you can consider this question and write down your response on a piece of paper. Please put the video on pause now. All right, let's begin. As we learned in our last lesson, with industrialization booming, many people moved from farms to cities in search of work. Many of the jobs available in the cities were in the factories. Most factory workers were from the working class or were new immigrants. They lived close to the factories in crowded neighborhoods. And here you can see a photo of Griffintown, a factory district in Montreal in 1896. My question for you is, what does this photo tell us about the industrial age? Please put the video on pause so that you can write down your response to this question. Okay, let's continue. In the factories, men, women, and children worked long hours for very low pay. The conditions were often dirty and dangerous. Accidents and fires were common. By the 1880s, provincial governments had to pass laws to govern safety conditions to protect workers. However, the regulations were often ignored or violated by employers. And this photo here shows workers cleaning up after the Great Toronto Fire of 1904. What challenges can we see resulting from a factory fire by looking at this image? Please put the video on pause so that you can write down your response to this question. Let's continue. Sometimes inspectors appeared at factories to check on the workplace conditions. They found the working conditions and training to be very poor. Still, factory workers lived under the rule of their employers. They were often forced to work overtime for no pay, and it was very hard to improve their quality of life. In the late 1800s, an increasing number of women began working outside the home. This gave them a chance to earn money for their work that they did. In Canada, 40% of women who worked outside the home took jobs as domestic servants. That means people paid to work in someone else's home to help with children or chores. Some women worked in stores and offices. As new machines such as typewriters and telephones were introduced, women were hired as telephone operators and secretaries. Women were also employed in the clothing industry. In addition, women also worked on assembly lines and factories. Like children, they worked long hours but received less pay than men for doing the same job. Here's a photo showing women working as telephone operators for Bell in Montreal in 1897. Industrialization made work life easier, however, machines still required people to operate them. Unskilled workers, meaning people who are not trained in a particular skill or trade, were a source of cheap labor. Children were the cheapest to hire, as they made less than half a man's salary. Children were employed in many different industries. As the 1900s approached, people began questioning the use of child labor. Investigations by the government led to stricter laws, and by the 1900s, the use of child labor began to diminish. The growing cities needed power to run the new factories, light the streets, and improve living conditions. Before 1800, the main sources of power in Canada were steam engines fueled by gas, coal, and wood. At that time, gas and coal were very expensive. Wood was becoming more expensive as it became more scarce. As electricity technology developed during the 1880s, Canadian cities replaced gas streetlights with electric lights. Electric streetcars replaced horse-drawn streetcars in the 1890s. Companies like the Toronto Electric Company began generating and selling electricity. There was not a lot of competition in the power industry at this time, so the price of power was high. Businesses wanted more power, but at lower prices to run their growing factories and keep profits high. A new source of electricity was found in hydroelectric power. In the late 1800s, wealthy investors across Canada started building hydroelectric stations. Soon, new innovations allowed for the transmission of power over long distances. Cities across Ontario started buying electricity from private companies. Due to concerns that larger cities like Toronto would buy up all the power, the Hydroelectric Power Commission of Ontario, later known as Ontario Hydro, was established in 1906. Ontario Hydro's purpose was, and still is, to sell electricity to Ontario communities at the cost of production. So let's finish this video by considering the following, and we'll discuss our responses in our next class. Number 1, how did life stay the same, and how did it change for people who moved from farms to cities? Number 2, what questions would you ask a woman or a child who was working in a factory at this time? I want you to put this video on pause when I finish speaking so that you can consider these two questions, write down your responses. If you don't feel confident in your ability to answer one or both of these questions, it means you need to go back and watch this video at least one more time. And then when you're ready, put the video on pause. All right, and as always, I look forward to an interesting discussion based around everybody's responses to these, as well as the other questions which were included in this recording. But until our next class, this concludes today's video.